Okay, so why don't we start with how you got started on your instrument?
So, I started piano lessons at age 7 when my family was living in Nigeria in West Africa for 5 years. My father is Nigerian, and so we moved back so that he would be close to his extended family. And it's a very musical culture, and everybody sings, and lots of people play instruments as amateur musicians. So we got a piano in the house. My sister started taking lessons. I learned to play by ear, and then a couple years later started to take lessons. But when I was 10 years old, the family moved back to Toronto, Canada. And at that point, my parents sent my brother and I to the cathedral choir school. So we sang in the cathedral every weekend, had daily choir rehearsals, in addition to a regular, rigorous academic program. And that was where I got exposed to hearing really great organ music every Sunday morning. And there was a pipe organ at the choir school. And when I was 12 years old, I started to take lessons with the cathedral organist. So by that point, I was taking piano lessons, which every student in the school had to do. But I was also taking violin and organ by age 12.
Can you tell us about one of the pieces on your program and why you chose it?
So I guess I'll talk about my arrangement of Corelli's Concerto Grosso, Opus 6, number 2 in F major. I love Corelli's music. I think it's so elegant. It's very different from the music of Vivaldi, who wrote hundreds of concertos, but the Vivaldi pieces are very energetic, and the Corelli feels a little bit more on the graceful and elegant side. So as organists, we all play concerto arrangements for organ of instrumental concertos, particularly by composers like Vivaldi. J.S. Bach wrote a lot of these, and when you study his arrangements, it's really interesting to see how much of his own personality he put into these. He changed a lot of things that were not so idiomatic to the organ, and it was a way of learning about Italian musical styles, but also a way of perfecting his own keyboard technique. And I think now we're in this era of being faithful to historical models. And so when we actually study these things, it can be a little shocking to just see how far Bach was able to go with this. So I started doing this as an exercise to sort of retrace the kinds of thought processes that Bach might have been dealing with as he arranged these pieces. And Bach did not arrange any concertos by Corelli. So it's been a fun project for me. I have two concerto arrangements by Corelli and one by Handel. And this summer, I'm hoping to do one more, which would be the famous Corelli Christmas concerto. But the other fun piece of this is that I just released a new CD a couple of weeks ago. It's actually a double CD set of the complete organ works of Georg Muffat, who was my first composer on the program. So he has this collection of 15 organ pieces, beginning with Toccata Prima, which is going to open my recital next week. And Muffat was a very cosmopolitan figure, traveled, lived, and worked in many places. And one of the places where he studied was Rome. And while he was there, he got to know Corelli. And it's thought that perhaps some sonatas that Muffat wrote in the Corelli style might have been given their first performance in Corelli's house. So when I program, I love to find connections between pieces on the programs. I feel like it shows a slightly more human side of the composers, to know who are the people that we're spending time with, who influenced them. These people didn't just live in a vacuum. But it wouldn't be possible to pair music of Muffat um, with organ music of Corelli, because we don't know of any. Corelli may not have written organ music, or likely did, but it hasn't come down to us, and it certainly wasn't published. So it's been fun to arrange these orchestral pieces, which are really well known, um, as a way of pairing in the same program music of Muffat and Corelli.
Do you have a favorite place or performance memory that's special to you?
Yeah, there are a few. One that seems to be a standout these days was a performance in 2019 at Klosterneuburg Abbey, which is about a 40-minute train ride outside of Vienna. It's a 12th century Augustinian monastery that has a lot of famous manuscripts there. And there is an organ built by Freund in 1642, and it's one of the most iconic quintessential South German Baroque organs. And this is a style of building that even most professional organists are not very familiar with. The music of Bach is so central to what we play that we know the central German organs from the area Bach lived, and then Bach traveled to the north and visited Buxtehude, for instance, in Lübeck, and so those organs have become very famous. But the South German organs are really very different, and so I had read about these things, and the opportunity came to give a recital there, and it was just like I don't know. I mean, it's like meeting your great grandmother, and then all of a sudden understanding things about your mother and your grandmother that you always wondered about. That kind of voice into the past. Um, and the organ was just absolutely magnificent, really beautifully voiced. Um, and I guess I'll tell a little bit of a funny story about this. So I had chosen a program very carefully that included some South German repertoire like Muffat, but I also wanted to see what else would be effective on this organ. So I played some Sweelinck, a 16th century Dutch composer. I played some Italian music. And I worked really, really hard to find a piece of Bach that would be playable. It's a modified mean tone temperament, so the tuning is very conservative. You can't play in very many keys. And the pedal board didn't have very many notes, so it didn't have a compass that was wide enough to play Bach's music. So I read through about 30 pieces, found one that would work with some modifications, and then had to practice this piece a certain way, inverting a few chords, moving things down or up an octave, just to get it to fit within the limited compass of the keyboard. But it was a small but very appreciative audience. And what several people said to me afterwards is that organ is a real treasure in their community. And they'd been coming to concerts for as many as 25 years, hearing, Austrian organ professors perform. And they had been told over and over again that the organ would only play Italian and South German Baroque music. And they said, how did you get it to play a 17th century Spanish piece and a 16th century Dutch piece? And we were told you can never play Bach. So I explained to them how carefully I had to kind of relearn this Bach piece to actually make it work on the organ. So that was really, really fun.
So, one of the other things, since this is our season of inspiration, we
Mm-hmm.
are asking all of our artists to talk about what inspires them or how
Mm-hmm.
they find inspiration in their music. So, what inspires you?
So I could talk about two things. One of them is that I feel fortunate to have studied with 5 or 6 really wonderful teachers who were amazing mentors for me. And it's hard to single a couple of people out because I don't want to offend anyone else. But I'll do it anyway. I mean, Thomas Murray, who was just retired actually as one of the organ professors at Yale, and he's somebody who's very interested in transcriptions for the organ of orchestral music. And it was something that was unique at the time. It wasn't really being taught anymore at a lot of mainstream organ programs that had been very fashionable in the early 20th century and then kind of fell out of fashion. And he was just somebody who had fallen in love with doing this and did it extremely well. So I was just inspired by his passion and excitement about that. And then when I was a doctoral student at Eastman School of Music, I studied with a man named Hans Davidson. And he is just a very knowledgeable, but also vibrant and energetic person and a very passionate teacher. And his thing has been to spearhead historical reconstructions of very significant Baroque and well, 17th, 18th, and 19th century organs. But again, although I learned a lot from him about that, it was more just this idea of these people who have dedicated their lives to really learning something in a lot of detail, and their passion and their commitment for sharing that with their students that has really resonated with me. So I always sort of was told myself that if I became an organ professor, I would want to essentially be them. And I've discovered in my journey that that didn't quite work, because I think increasingly one tries to be a slightly different version of yourself for each student that you work with one-on-one, and figure out how to be the best teacher for each individual. But nevertheless, I'm inspired by their commitment and their passion and their knowledge.